Hey y'all, welcome to the beginning of the final half of GSA Season 2. Before we begin, you know the drill concerning the stat bar currently on screen. Please subscribe since this helps grow and support the channel, and while you are at it, please also be sure to recap yourself using the series playlist if needed, and make sure to subscribe to RONIN CHARIZARD, Pickled Dill, Dex Comics, and all the creators who will be involved in the project in the future, as well as those who have already contributed to its creation like editors and artists. Please enjoy the show.
Aftermath, the consequences of bonds. We resume our tale months in the past. It is a stunned silence freshly created by Lance and the Birds of Legends' decision to destroy Mewtwo, Ash and all the boys' Pokemon in the process. It is only broken at the shrill scream of the boys' friends as Brock, feeling the weight of a failed protector, loses the strength in his legs, just as Ritchie faces a break with reality, unbelieving that one of his best friends is truly gone, while Misty and Silver, needing to process their rage, address Lance no longer as champion, but as murderer. Gary stoically hangs his head in deep thought as those who'd met and seen Ash's heart, like Surge and Blaine, join the vocal tirade, accusing the champion of preying on their legendary companion's inherent fear of Mewtwo for such an unnecessary use of force. However, the Dragon Master remains resolute, saying that he'd known the boy as well, but even so, that doesn't change his duty to the region as its champion and to the world as a G-Man. Mewtwo was a threat to both, so he did what he had to do, regrettable though his actions may have been. With a note of apprehension, Bruno and Lorelei back their leader's claims, while Koga breathes that though he does not agree with the champion's decision, he can see how it was reached, and so will not condemn him for the choice he made in the heat of the moment. In contrast to Koga's detached response, Erika is full of passion as she wordlessly gives Lance a look that speaks to deep disappointment and a growing distrust as she stalks across the ruined battlefield to stand as far away from the Dragon Master while still being among Kanto's defenders. This puts her alongside Spencer and Agatha, who seem to share her disgust, while Sabrina, who had up until this point been standing with them, vanishes, her parting being marked only by the look of concern. No one seems to want to talk much at this point, causing a terrible silence to fall, only broken by a faint moaning of Team Rocket's members who had been caught up in either Mewtwo's psychic outburst or the aftershocks of the legendary bird's finishing moves. Perhaps in an attempt to redeem himself, Lance begins the process of rounding these criminals up with the help of his Pokemon. As the presumed leader, he deals with Archer personally, pinning the man to the wall and ordering him to spill everything he knows. From behind the champ, a male voice scowls that there's no point in interrogating that pathetic slime, since he's just a patsy of Team Rocket's real leader. Looking back, Lance sees the red-headed boy who had emerged from the lower level with Ash and the captured Pokemon. In a voice as cold as a Frostlass's kiss, Lance asks the boy who he is and what he knows of the true leader, and without preamble, he replies with his name and just as coldly admits he knows plenty, considering how it's his old man. This causes a ripple to go through the crowd, though the biggest reaction comes from Archer, whose smarmy demeanor is completely abandoned as he howls that Silver is a disloyal wretch, undeserving of association with a great man. However, Silver has no interest in being lectured, and so, in a voice scarily reminiscent of Giovanni, he barks at the exec to shut his worthless trap, lest he does it for him, before looking back to Lance and continuing that Giovanni brought him and his friends to New Island, so there's a good chance he's still here if Lance wants to actually do his job and capture the boss Rocket.
Choosing to ignore this disrespect, Lance asks where Giovanni is, and when Silver points his thumb at the hole he and the others emerge from, the Dragon Master darts off, ordering Erika to keep an eye on Archer and Silver to make sure they don't go anywhere. Scoffing that it's not like he could leave if he wanted to, Silver sits himself on the damaged floor to await Lance's return, while all around him, the remaining gym leaders take this as their cue to depart. The likes of Nolan, Surge, and Blaine, though invested in what happens next, reasoning their friends need to make a hasty exit. Soon, the only ones left are Erika, Silver, Ritchie, Gary, Brock, and Misty, with the latter five all looking to each other as if half imploring someone to say Ash's name, while simultaneously begging them not to mention their fallen friend. This creates a painful silence that lasts until Lance returns half an hour later, an ugly scowl on his face, and more noticeably, no handcuffed Giovanni beside him. Silver, it seems, is just as disappointed as Lance, growling that he should have figured his old man would have an escape plan, while beside him, Ritchie pats his friend's back, promising that one day they'll bring Giovanni to justice. Silver nods, venomously vowing to chase that slime ball to the ends of the earth if he has to, but Gary cuts in, saying that he wants payback for what Giovanni did to them too, but first, they need to return to Pallet Town, since Mrs. Ketchum deserves to know what happened to Ash. And just like that, the spell is broken. By invoking his name, no one can pretend that Ash isn't gone, and Silver feels a knot in his gut as he thinks of his fallen friend, the realization that the term finally applies, making his heartache all the more. Clearing the lump from his throat, the son of Giovanni declares that he will go with Garrett to pay his respects, while the rest of Ash's companions rise at their own pace in agreement. But with a firm edge that only makes him sound heartless, Lance interjects that he can't let Silver go. Like it or not, Silver is an associate of Giovanni, so he'll be taken into G-Men custody and probably even given over to Interpol eventually, considering Team Rocket's rumored ties to the villainous teams of the Hoenn region amongst others. Flaring up, Misty calls this completely unfair, since Lance only knows of Giovanni's involvement because of Silver. But Erica calmly disagrees, revealing that the G-Men have been keeping tabs on the Viridian gym leader for quite some time, so at most, Silver is a cooperating witness. But even if the young man were not under suspicion for aiding Team Rocket, both here in Kanto as well as the Johto region, he is still their best lead, so he would be placed in protective custody anyway. This still seems awfully unfair to Misty, Brock, Gary, and Ritchie, who stand as one, hands around their Pokeballs if they prepare to fight 2 G-Men if need be, as none of them are willing to lose another friend so soon after losing Ash. But Silver, knowing what his compatriots are thinking, grunts at them to stop. For once, he doesn't want to see any more violence, so if Lance wants him to turn himself in, he'll do it, but not until he's gone to Pal to discharge his one last duty to a friend. Lance bluntly calls us out of the question, but Erica, who is still giving Lance that disgusted look, says she can't see the harm in it, especially if it means their witness will be more cooperative. If need be, she offers to accompany him as a chaperone and escort him back to the G-Man headquarters afterwards. Silver gives a curt nod of agreement, and so, bringing out his fleet of dragons to save time, the champ tells Silver and his friends to get on. Each mounts up on one of Lance's Pokemon, while Silver rides on Dragonite with Lance at the Dragon Master's insistence. However, shockingly, Ritchie does not follow. In a concerned voice, Brock asks the young brunette what's wrong, and with deep sorrow in his words, Ritchie admits that he needs a bit more time to clear his head before he can be around more people. So he thinks he'll just stay here for a little while longer if that's okay with everyone. Lance seems indifferent, while Silver nods his understanding, urging his friend to stay safe along with the others. And with this solemn goodbye, the Dragon Riders depart to pay their last respects to Ash Ketchum.
In the present, Misty's eyes now fall on Ash, alive and well, battling a gym leader as if these last few months never happened. That jerk, storming over, the fiery flower of Cerulean City wastes no time, while her friend seems to share her haste, smiling like an idiot and turning towards her with arms out for a hug. However, before he can complete the gesture, Meowth senses a bit of bloodlust and wisely leaps off his partner's shoulders just as Misty drives her fist into his face with a loud cry, "You idiot!" as tears stream down her face, and the boy flies back with a bloody nose. A little dazed, Ash demands to know what that was for, but Misty only responds with a question of her own, asking how Ash is even here, her tone a jumble of relief, confusion, and anger. Wiping his face and clambering back to his feet, Ash promises to explain everything when they're somewhere more private, but Misty will have none of this, glaring accusingly as she asks, how does she know he won't just vanish on her again, or if he's really just another Team Rocket scumbag, or if this is even real. An almost pleading note to his voice, Ash protests that he didn't choose to disappear on New Island. He got teleported away by— The sentence is cut off as Meowth sticks one of his claws into Ash's leg, looking down to wordlessly ask why his partner did. Ash sees the Scratch Cat gesture towards Giselle, and at once falls silent, realizing how close he came to revealing his secret. Speaking of Giselle, the Pokemon Tech alum has now made her way over to the duo, greeting Misty warmly and asking how she's been, as if there's nothing strange about this meeting. Misty's return greeting is purely functionary, her eyes still squarely on Ash, and as she asks Erica if there's anywhere the two can speak alone. Nodding, the grass specialist directs them into a room in the back of the healing machine, encouraging that Ash may treat Bellossom while they speak. And as Ash and Misty enter, Giselle tries to follow, only to be grabbed around the collar by Erica, who politely suggests that she requires the girl's help elsewhere.
The healing room is rather cramped, with Ash and Misty being in close proximity, and as Ash fumbles with Bellossom's ball, both Misty and Meowth can tell that he is stalling. However, even this cannot last forever, and soon Ash has no choice but to look his friend in the eye as the healing machine whirs, seeing the expectation, concern, and most importantly, the hurt that his absence has induced in her. Misty, I'm really sorry I didn't contact you guys after the island. The last few months have been insane. However, there is little sympathy in his friend's eyes, as she instantly responds back that she can imagine him being officially dead and all after that funeral. Have you even contacted your mother yet? She was destroyed. Misty's own anger begins to fade, as at the mention of his mom, Ash's eyes shine and well with tears, which he fights to hold back, proving this to be a losing battle, as he suddenly breaks down and causes the older girl to instinctively pull him into a hug, as Ash's emotions burst forth, and leaves her looking to Meowth for help. With some shame, the Scratch Cat decides to carry the weight his partner cannot, and starts from the beginning, telling her everything from Ash's ill-bred starter to how he, Jesse, and James are assigned to watch the boy, as well as how he more directly spied on and manipulated Ash at Giovanni's behest for the majority of their time together. Misty is horrified by what she is hearing, but even still she listens on, as the tale turns to Meowth's betrayal and the events that followed on New Island. Here, the girl shows a hint of impatience, having witnessed much of this with her own eyes, but all annoyance dies when Meowth explains what happened next with Mewtwo, the battle tower, Giovanni's threats, and the time Ash has spent since the Rocket Boss's plaything once more, all to keep those he loves safe. When the Scratch Cat is done, Misty looks to her friend, heartbreak in her tone as she asks if this is true, and unable to speak, Ash simply nods.
It's been a few days since the world-altering battle on New Island, and Ritchie is all alone in the ruins. Not that he minds, since after everything that has happened, he needs some time to think. The man he admired most and once aspired to emulate has turned out to be a manipulative monster, and the man who exemplifies his dreams to one day be champion has murdered one of his best friends in cold blood. Nothing makes sense anymore, and as Ritchie stares out to the sea, he doesn't know what to do or where to go from here. He is rudderless and adrift. Perhaps he might have sat forever, wallowing in uncertainty and despair, but for a cry that pulls him from his reverie. Blinking away his stupor, Ritchie looks around, hearing the trembled cry again, and this time recognizing that it's coming from the water. Scanning the waves, he sees a pink shape rising and falling beneath the waves, clearly caught up in the current with no way to escape. Its cry now rings out for a third time, breathless now. Ritchie can't tell whatever it is, but it is drowning, and more importantly, that it needs help. Without a moment's hesitation, Ritchie leaps into the iron-black waves, sea salt stinging his nose and burning cold at his limbs, but he doesn't care. Kicking off with all of his might and swimming towards the flailing pink shape. Up close, he can see that it is a Jigglypuff, and so, crying out, he tells it to stay calm, that he will save it. He promises. A wave then crashes overhead, thrusting the young brunette down deep into the depths with enough force to expel any air that he might have had in his lungs. Lights pop behind Ritchie's eyes, and for one dazed moment, he can't tell which way is up, but forcing himself to stay calm, he is able to find the surface, and so pulls himself towards it, inch by inch, determined not to break that promise he just made.
Just as shadows begin to form at the edges of his vision, Ritchie breaks the surface, gasping for air and turning until he finds Jigglypuff nearby. Spotting its would-be savior, the little fairy type gives an overjoyed cry of Jiggly, as Ritchie pulls it into a hug before helping it onto his back, where it should at least be safe from the worst of the water. Now, the only question is how to get themselves back to shore, but with Jigglypuff out of immediate danger, Ritchie is able to think a little clearer, and so doing what he realizes he should have from the start, pulls Dune's ball from his belt and hurls it into the sky. In a flash of light, the desert dragon appears, and despite her dislike of water, she deftly dives low enough to grab her trainer and pull him and his little passenger up and into the air. Moments later, the trio touch down back on the shore of New Island, and after thanking his starter for the assist, Ritchie goes to check on Jigglypuff. For the most part, it seems unhurt, though thanks to all the screaming coupled with the copious amounts of salt water it inhaled, its throat is red raw, and when it speaks, there is a croakiness to its voice. This deeply upsets the little pink diva, as it had wished to sing for Ritchie to convey its thanks, but the boy is able to understand just fine, patting its head and telling it that he's just glad it's safe. This brings a tear to Jigglypuff's aquamarine eyes, and so leaping into Ritchie's arms, it hugs him tight, causing the boy to smile genuinely for the first time in 3 days. From here, the little Jigglypuff becomes his constant companion, toddling or floating beside him as he makes his way through the wreckage. And despite his previous wish for solitude, Ritchie is happy to have the company of someone who he knows genuinely cares about him. The following afternoon, while exploring what is left of the subterranean passage that he, Ash, Gary, and Silver escaped through, Ritchie hears a heavy thud that manages to rock the entire island. Unsure whether to hide or have a look, he and Jigglypuff decide to head deeper into the passages in the hope of finding a good vantage point. This leads them to what appears to be the remainder of a laboratory, in a state of total disarray. And while this is not uncommon for the structures of New Island, what makes this place noticeable is that the wreckage appears to be old, with a thin film of dust coating everything. Stepping inside with Jigglypuff beside him, Ritchie goes over to inspect the only computer terminal which seems to be in operational condition, and as soon as he lays a finger on its dusty screen, a series of images flash across it.
Most of it appears to be complex research data that Ritchie can't make heads or tails of, but soon he spots a word he knows: Mewtwo. Now he begins to recognize some of the images as samples of a developing Mewtwo, as well as reports of its growing psychic powers. He also finds something more disturbing, references to something called the Omega Protocol, which seems to be a failsafe program in Mewtwo that has something to do with himself and the other former proteges of Giovanni. Desperately, Ritchie tries to slow the rapid shifting images, wanting to know what this Omega Protocol is, and what it means for him and his friends. But all his tapping does is changes the images on the screen to what appears to be a recording of a security camera footage from this very lab. Like now, it is in shambles, but in the recording, it's also on fire. And at the heart of all of this are two figures. The first is a man with a large nose, cracked glasses, and a coif of wavy hair, and the second is Mewtwo, glowing with the malicious aura.
Through the terminal's crackly speakers, Ritchie hears the man mutter,
"We dreamed of creating the world's strongest Pokemon, and we succeeded."
Then, everything turns to black. It seems they did. A gruff voice agrees from behind Ritchie, causing the boy to jump with fright and spin around to see a man standing at the doorway to the lab. Gulping in air, Ritchie demands to know who the stranger is, and placidly, he introduces himself as Pyramid King Brandon. This does nothing to clarify for Ritchie, and so backing away a little, he asks Brandon what he's doing here. Still calm, Brandon answers that he was invited like all the rest, but it seems he arrived too late to help the fight against Mewtwo, so now he is doing what he does best, investigating the ruins. He then gives Ritchie a sharp look, and showing that he has an equally sharp mind, states that he must have been here when the battle happened, since he doubts there would be any other reason for someone to come to New Island, so he needs the boy to tell him everything, right now.
Feeling justifiably distrustful of adult men at this point, Ritchie asks why he should when he doesn't even know anything about this Brandon guy, who for all he knows could be another Team Rocket bad guy. Smiling ever so slightly, Brandon muses that Team Rocket were involved, were they? That is useful, before telling Ritchie to keep going. Ritchie, however, refuses, declaring that he won't say another word, while beside him, Jigglypuff glares at Brandon with as much ferocity as the little pink balloon can manage. Spotting the fairy type, Brandon asks if this means Ritchie is its trainer, and seeing no harm in the question, he nods. This makes Brandon's tiny smile grow a bit more, as he says that in that case, he has an offer for Ritchie. Battle him right here, and if he can beat him, he doesn't have to answer any questions. Feeling confident in his team, Ritchie nods in the agreement. So Brandon brings forth his Pokemon, a large stone golem with 7 flashing lights on its face. It is unlike anything Ritchie has ever seen before, and having destroyed his Pokédex, he can't scan it to gain any information, but by the looks of it, it's probably a rock type, which means, Snipes, I choose you. Bursting from the ball, Snipes spins in place, building up momentum as Brandon invites the pair to take the first move. Not wanting to waste this opportunity, Ritchie calls for a rolling kick, and quick as a flash, the little fighting type launches itself upward before spinning in midair and landing an aerial roundhouse kick on the creature's head. For a moment, nothing happens, with the rock type not even seemingly to register Snipe's presence. But when Brandon tells it to fight back, it doesn't hesitate, swinging out an arm which smashes Snipes into the wall and causes him to drop to the ground unconscious. Ritchie cries his despair as he returns his fighting type, but in an interested voice, Brandon asks Ritchie if he has any other Pokemon he can use. Ritchie says he does, and so Brandon tells him to bring out his next one.
Weighing his options, Ritchie chooses Dune next, with the dragon buzzing as it stares down his unknown opponent, and when he sees it, Brandon gives an approving nod, calling it a powerful creature from its homeland. Ritchie grins, boasting that Dune is his oldest partner, before telling her to flap her mighty wings with all her might. Ever the faithful companion, Dune obeys, and all around the decimated lab, the accumulated dust begins to whip around, creating an artificial dust storm. Covering his mouth with his hand, Ritchie then adds that no one can match Dune in these conditions, but this assessment may be premature, as moments later, a boulder shoots through the dusty haze, hitting Dune head on and knocking her out despite her type resistance. Quickly, the dust storm dies down, but Brandon seems unfazed, telling Ritchie to bring out his next Pokemon, who happens to be Dusa, his Tangela. But Dusa falls in one hit, as do Foxy and Happy, leaving Ritchie seemingly without any Pokemon to use. However, this is where Jigglypuff steps up, proudly pounding its chest and wordlessly declaring its desire to fight for Ritchie. Smiling, Ritchie accepts its help, telling it to use its best attack. This, as it turns out, is Double Slap, with the pink puffball giving the rock type's knee the thrashing of its life. Unfortunately, just as with all other attacks, Brandon's Pokemon doesn't seem to even notice, allowing Jigglypuff to finish before kicking it away with enough force to knock it out too.
Knowing that Jigglypuff was Ritchie's 6th, Brandon recalls his rock type before asking the boy if he's ready to make good on that deal yet. But worriedly, Ritchie tells him it'll have to wait, since first he needs to get his Pokemon medical attention. Nodding approvingly, Brandon tells him to follow him, since this battle pyramid has an onboard medical facility which he can use. Sighing with relief, Ritchie gathers Jigglypuff in his arms and follows the Pyramid King back to the surface. To Ritchie's surprise, where once were only ruins, now a giant pyramid stands, and as the duo head inside, the boy asks how it got here. Grinning slightly again, Brandon answers that his battle facility also serves as an aerial vehicle, allowing him to travel wherever he is needed, though due to its size, not necessarily at high speeds. He then leads Ritchie to the medical bay, where the young man deposits his 5 Pokeballs. However, here a problem arises, as Jigglypuff is still technically a wild Pokemon, meaning that it is unable to be healed by Brandon's machine. Looking down at the fairy type, Ritchie asks if it would be willing to let him catch it so it can be healed, and from the look it gives in return, it's clear that Jigglypuff has been waiting for the chance to officially become a member of Ritchie's team. As his Pokemon heal, Ritchie lives up to his end of the bargain, telling Brandon everything he knows about the battle as well as Giovanni's involvement. The Pyramid King listens intently throughout, seemingly finding this all quite troubling, and when Ritchie is done, he gives the boy a parental look, asking what he plans to do with himself now. Pausing briefly, Ritchie admits that before he wasn't sure, but now he thinks he knows. He wants to train here in the battle pyramid with Brandon, so he can grow strong enough to ensure that what happened to Ash will never happen to any of his friends again. Looking Ritchie up and down, Brandon muses that it's pretty presumptuous to assume that he'll just let the boy become his disciple. But Ritchie remains resolute, asking if this means he won't train him. For a moment, Brandon seems to weigh this up. Then, with a hint of a smile back on his face, the Pyramid King replies, "No."
It takes several minutes for Ash to dry his tears and find his voice, with Misty holding him all the while. But eventually, the young man is able to stem the flow long enough to thank her, as well as Meow for explaining things. The Scratch Cat shrugged this off as no big deal, but Misty is far less forgiving, turning her glare on Meowth and calling what he did to Ash really rotten, before telling him to get out or else she'll have one of her water types spray him. Yelping, Meowth makes for the door, though not before promising his boss that he'll be just outside if he needs him. When they are alone, Misty gives Ash a serious, almost inspecting look, as she asks if he's really alright. With less quivering to his voice now, Ash replies that he is, though he's more worried about her. Even though Giovanni promised him no more games or threats, he trusts that man about as far as he can throw him. And with him and the remainder of his top-class rockets being so close by, it will be very easy for an accident to befall her. Fear fills Misty's eyes at this, and at first Ash thinks it's the same fear he feels for her safety, but a closer inspection tells him it's something different. She is afraid of him, of how easily that thought came to him, and how it came out of his mouth so casually. The taint of Giovanni's influence, which she can now see as clearly as the rest. Figuring there is no point in holding back anymore, Ash looks his friend squarely in the eye, and in a voice of absolute surety, tells her that this is why Giovanni needs to be removed, permanently, and why he needs her help, since he knows they will only get one shot at this. Now, it is Misty's turn to have a tremble in her voice, as she asks what exactly Ash is suggesting, and with no hesitation, Ash tells her he means to storm the base under the game corner and destroy Giovanni and Team Rocket, once and for all. But for that, as he always has, he'll need the help of his friends, since as of right now, he can't hope to defeat Giovanni on his own.
Seemingly reaching the conclusion that this is still the Ash she knows and trusts, Misty asks what she can do to help, and with a grim smile, Ash says what he really needs is someone to covertly spread the word to any of the people that fought alongside her at New Island who might be willing to fight Team Rocket, since with Giovanni watching him so closely, he cannot afford to be seen contacting anyone. And beyond this, there really is no telling who is in league with the man. Nodding, Misty asks what about their friends, but Ash tells her to leave them to him, since thanks to Annabelle and Mewtwo's abilities, he can reach them through more discreet channels that Giovanni can't track. The thought of getting one over on the man responsible for all their woes puts a smile on Misty's face, but Ash remains serious as he says that there is something else he needs Misty's help with, if she would be willing. Cocking her head slightly, Misty asks what it is, and in a factual tone, Ash answers that as previously alluded, he is not strong enough to defeat Giovanni right now, but he means to change that by the time they storm the base. So for that reason, Ash wants her to battle with him, and to go all out, so they both can become stronger. Grinning, Misty replies that he's on, but to be warned that just because she missed him doesn't mean that she's going to be holding anything back.
To call Ash's funeral a heartbreaking event would be an understatement. Being an old family friend, Professor Oak had offered to host a memorial at his laboratory, and so the young hero's friends and family gather in the crowd to pay their respects. Even some of the warriors from New Island, such as Agatha and Lance, are in attendance, and as one of Ash's closest friends, Silver is seated in the front row, though he really suspects that the only reason Lance allowed this was so that he could sit behind him and watch his back in case the young redhead tried to run. This has been the way of things since leaving New Island, surveillance and distrust at every turn. And as Silver feels the Dragon Master's gaze boring into the back of his skull, anger flares inside him. He fought against Mewtwo like all the other defenders of Kanto, yet because of who his father is, he is being treated like a criminal, while the man who actually killed Ash is hailed as a hero. And this along with Ritchie's absence makes the truth set in. He misses Ash. The damn knucklehead never treated him any differently on account of Giovanni. Both before and after he'd learned what kind of man he really is, he always just treated Silver as a rival and a friend. It was just a simple kindness, but one he can now never repay. For about an hour, various mourners take their turn sharing a story about Ash, including Brock, Misty, and Gary. Silver wants to do the same, but he refrains, knowing that with everything now out in the open, including Giovanni's duplicity and his ties to the Team Rocket boss, to do so would be to taint this gathering with that bastard's presence. He won't do that to Ash or his mother. Instead, he watches on wordlessly as Mrs. Ketchum finally takes the stage, showing incredible strength of spirit as she thanks them all for their support in this difficult time and invites them back to our home for a wake. Once more, Silver chooses to absent himself, though this time because he doubts Lance's patience will extend as far as a wake, and he doesn't want the G-Men causing a scene in front of Ash's friends and family. Never one for long goodbyes, Silver rises, turning his back on the others, but before he can tell Lance to take him away, Gary lays a hand on his shoulder, saying that he hoped Silver wasn't going to leave without him.
This leaves the son of Giovanni utterly perplexed, but It is Lance who answers, smiling that of course he wouldn't think of leaving his new protege. His voice is breezy and cheerful as he says this, like he is in the middle of a TV interview, and the anger twisting in Silver's stomach boils over into rage. How can Lance smile and joke here of all places? Doesn't he feel any guilt for what he did? He then promises Gary that they'll be off momentarily. He just wants to step inside and have a word with his grandfather first. It is only now that his eyes fall on Silver, and his demeanor could not be more different. Gone is the winning smile and the fatherly lilt to his voice, instead replaced by contempt as he brusquely barks, "You stay here!" From the start, Lance has only ever referred to Silver as you, almost like the thought of using his name would dirty him, and each time he says it, Silver only grows to hate the G-Man a little bit more. However, in spite of this loathing, he says nothing, merely giving a stiff nod of his head and watching as Lance swishes away. When they are alone, Silver looks to Gary with curiosity, asking what's this about, him becoming Lance's protege, and slightly awkwardly, Gary admits that Lance offered him the position shortly after they arrived in Palatown, with the promise that they would train together at the Indigo Plateau. Despite his feelings towards Lance, Silver does not begrudge Gary of this opportunity, and when the young oak attempts to rationalize his acceptance to this offer, Silver curtly cuts him off, saying he doesn't need the other boy's justifications. This is a good opportunity. He just hopes Gary knows what kind of man Lance truly is, since they both well know misjudging one's sponsor can have disastrous consequences.
Neither feel much like talking after this, and so the pair stand in silence until Lance returns roughly 15 minutes later with a pleased look on his face. Smiling at Gary, he tells him that it's time to go, putting one hand on the boy's shoulder, while with the other, he pulls a set of handcuffs from under his cape, tossing them to Silver and telling him to put them on. Vein pulsing in his temple, Silver asks why, pointing out that he's cooperating with the investigation, but with an officious tone that causes Silver to ball his fist in fury. Lance replies that it's standard procedure to transport a suspect this way, before ordering him once more to put them on. Scowl deepening, Silver flatly refuses, pointing out this is ridiculous, since if he wanted to resist, he could have escaped a dozen different ways by now, but he hasn't. In fact, he hasn't done anything wrong, which makes one of them. Unlike the capricious beast he specializes in training, Lance remains calm in the face of this insult, with the only sign that he has been angered being his eyes, which seem to burn as he advances on Silver. Coldly, he tells the boy once more to put on the cuffs, but having had enough of this treatment, Silver tosses them aside, tauntingly asking what happens if he doesn't. For a brief moment, he thinks he sees a shadow of a smile curl Lance's lips at this, like he'd been waiting for an excuse to turn nasty. Before he can answer, a smooth voice replies that he doesn't really think there's any need for this sort of hostility. After all, it's just like Silver said, they're all on the same side. Whipping round, Silver, Gary, and Lance can find no trace of the speaker, but they are not left to wonder long, as moments later, one of the boulders lining the corral rises up to reveal that it is actually a clever disguise. Casting aside his costume, the speaker shows himself to be a middle-aged man with graying hair and a trench coat, and when Lance sees him, he bows slightly, admitting that he didn't know he was here, and addressing the man as Sir. The trenchcoat man nods as if telling Lance to be at ease, explaining that Erica called him in his backup, and it's a good thing that he came, since from what he gathered under the rock, Lance is trying to juggle a new protege with minding their witness. To help out, he'll take over the latter task, meaning Lance can put all his attention into training young Mr. Oak here, just like he promised. This is not phrased as an offer, but rather as an order, and though Lance looks hesitant, he ultimately yields, bowing to the man who he calls Looker for leaving the lab with Gary in tow.
The sigh, Looker apologizes for Lance, telling Silver that he and Erica were once his most promising apprentices. But it seems that since becoming champion, Lance has been struggling with the two sides of his identity. Silver coldly sneers that from where he's standing, there's nothing complex about the Dragon Master. He's an egotist and a bully, just like Giovanni. Grinning wearily, Looker acknowledges that he can see how Silver would think that, walking over to the discarded cuffs and picking them up. Still cold, Silver asks if he's going to try and make him wear those too, but Looker shrugs that he doesn't see the point, especially with how out of place it would look at the wake. Silver cocks his head in slight confusion, and Looker smiles that observing people is his trade, so it's only natural that he'd be able to spot how much the boy wants to go. And personally, he sees no reason he shouldn't. Ash was his friend and comrade, and he deserves to be able to pay his respects the same way anyone else would. Bitterly, Silver sighs that Lance didn't see it that way, but still sporting that affable smile, Looker retorts that Lance isn't here. Silver's first thoughts upon stepping into the Ketchum residence is how homey it is, that it was a loving environment to grow up in, is as apparent as the paint on the walls. And just from the way Mrs. Ketchum greets him, he thinks he can understand a bit more about Ash and how he became the person he was. It is a far cry from the sterile base that he grew up in, and for a brief, unworthy moment, he feels intense envy for his departed friend. However, this quickly passes, leaving shame in his wake, which mingles well with the other regrets invoked by the thoughts of Ash. Looking up at Mrs. Ketchum, Silver asks if there's anything he can do for her, but with a smile that is wholly overshadowed by grief, the mourning mother shakes her head, saying saying that Brock is already assisting her in the kitchen, though she is grateful for all the kindness that Ash's friends have shown. To be referred to as kind feels odd to Silver, and once more using that observational training, Looker picks up on that, seating himself in an armchair and smiling that it's true. From what he's seen, Silver is a kind boy. Scowling at the thought of this stranger reading his innermost thoughts, Silver mumbles that Looker doesn't know what he's done, but Looker chuckles that he actually does, having familiarized himself with Silver's file quite thoroughly before coming here. He knows that Silver stole his feraligator from Professor Elm's lab. He knows that the boy has brutalized both his own and other people's Pokemon multiple times in pursuit of power, and he knows that more than once he was an unwitting accomplice to the crimes of Team Rocket. However, there is one other thing he knows, that he knew that the moment he looked into the boy's eyes, that he regrets all of it and would do anything to make it right. This, in his eyes, is the mark of a truly kind soul, since kindness is not the absence of cruelty, it is the desire to rectify it. From what he's heard, Ash was a very kind child, and now it seems that influence has spread to all of his friends, even if they cannot see it for themselves.
A heavy silence hangs between the pair after this, with Silver's eyes being drawn to a photo of a younger Ash smiling in his mother's arms. Finally, after another moment, Silver asks Looker what he wants him to do with that. Meeting the boy's eyes with an earnest gaze, the detective replies that he wants Silver to help him, and he will help the boy in return. Hackles raising, though less than they would have even a few weeks ago, Silver asks what exactly Looker needs help with, and still sounding earnest, Looker replies, rectifying the cruelty you see all around you. At this point, Brock passes by carrying a plate of sandwiches, and taking two, Looker hands one to Silver, encouraging him to eat since he surely must be hungry after the emotional toll of the day. It is only at this moment that Silver realizes just how hungry he really is, and so he takes his first bite, while Looker nods approvingly, something like fondness in his eyes. As they eat, Looker continues to speak, his tone as light as if they were discussing nothing more meaningful than the weather, and with no hint of pretension, he tells the boy that this is not an ultimatum, it is an offer. If Silver wants, the two of them can conclude their business right here, and he will be free to go without any risk of reprisal from the G-Men or Anipoke. Or, and the detective pauses here, something like excitement twinkling in his eyes at this second possibility, they can become partners. He will train Silver so that next time his and Giovanni's paths cross, he can bring him to justice. Wanting to give Silver time to mull this life-changing decision over, Looker returns to his sandwich, studiously looking at it and the rest of the house, anything but the boy across from him. But he isn't given long to wait, as before the rest of the sandwich is even in the detective's mouth, Silver speaks up, and there is great gravity to his voice as he says that he chooses the second option. However, he has a condition, that he still be able to complete his gym challenge and enter the Pokemon League, since he made a promise with all his friends and rivals that it would be the best way to honor Ash. Once more, Looker's eyes flash, and there is no mistaking his eagerness, with the detective smiling that he wouldn't dream of making his new protege break a promise to a friend, and in fact, he will do all he can to assist in that goal. From what he's read, Silver has 6 of his 8 required badges, though by rights he should have 7, since the League Association ruled that Ash and his friends be granted the Earth Badge in recognition of their efforts against Giovanni and Mewtwo. And to his understanding, the only reason Silver hasn't received his yet is because Lance held onto it as a means of leverage. With that no longer necessary, he will personally see to it that Silver is issued with an Earth Badge before the League, which means that now he only needs 1. Of the remaining gyms, the 2 most well-regarded are the Saffron and Celadon gyms, and since he has safe houses in both cities, either could be made into their temporary base of operations, allowing Silver to easily challenge the gym there. Bluntly, Silver requests to do so in Saffron, seeing as how he feels he can't run away from overcoming Sabrina before he enters the league. If time permits, he'll make his way to Celadon, if only to provide Honchko with an easy way to power up.
And here I thought the gym leader you'd feel compelled to defeat would be Giovanni. You are his brat, aren't you? A crackling female voice snarks from behind Silver. Spinning around, the redhead sees the speaker is none other than Agatha, who is at this moment eyeing him with great interest. Silver growls that of course he's going to take down his old man, but after their last fight, he saw how strong he really is, so he's going to gain some more strength rather than go off half-cocked again. This seems to amuse the crone, who taunts that yes, as it stands, he is far too weak to bring Giovanni to justice or honor his fallen friend. What was that again? Alf? This sets Silver's blood to boil, and with no attempt at masking his fury, he snaps that former leader or not, he's going to battle her right now. Still crackling, Agatha remarks that it seems that she's making it a habit of battling the whelps of famous men. After all, she's already beaten Oak's grandson earlier today. No surprise, since the boy's just as much of an arrogant fool as his grandfather. From a short distance away, Professor Oak steps forth, as if drawn by the sound of his own name, and when he sees who's talking, lightly admonishes the old woman for trying to provoke their young friend. With a scowl, Agatha protests that it was working before he had to be an old softy and spoil the game. But when Oak's stern gaze doesn't lift, she lets out a huff and apologizes to Silver, saying she was curious to see what his battling prowess was like, and figured stoking his temper would get her what she wanted. Gritting his teeth, Silver replies that he meant what he said. He is going to battle her now, and this makes Agatha grin, telling Oak that it seems in spite of their best efforts, he hasn't foiled her after all. But to make up for the attempt, he now has to battle alongside her, since she's decided to test the boy in a double battle. Oak and Silver look equally surprised at this declaration, but Agatha smirks that Silver should be thanking her, since Samuel here was once a Pokemon League champion, so if he wants to gain strength, he could ask for no better sparring partners than an Elite Four member and a champ. Retired, Oak corrects modestly on both fronts as he gives Silver an apologetic look and a huff from his old rival. But to his surprise, Silver actually nods, saying that he does want to get strong enough to take down his dad and honor Ash. So, if they'll allow it, he'll like to take them up on their offer. Cackling gleefully now, Agatha smiles that she knew she liked this one for some reason, before telling him and his trench-coated clad friend to follow her back to Oak's corral.
A few minutes later, Silver, Professor Oak, Agatha, and Looker are all gathered in the corral behind the lab, with the former trio all being in position to battle, while the detective referees. Agatha, as the initiator of the challenge, brings out her partner first, Gengar, while Oak chooses a Pokemon that Silver has actually never seen, but who vaguely resembles a Porygon. Having destroyed his Pokédex back on New Island, the boy has to ask what it is. And with a smile of one who loves sharing his knowledge, Oak replies that this is called Porygon Z, the final stage of Porygon. He then prepares to embark on a lecture all about the creature until Agatha curtly chides her teammate for giving away too much. She then instructs Silver to choose his own Pokemon, and feeling the fairest way to test himself would be to match their types, he brings out Haunter and Eevee. This allows him to more or less decide who battles who due to each of the Pokemon being immune to one of the others on the field. And Oak even praises Silver for his tactical thinking. However, he does have a counter for this. Waiting for Silver to order Eevee to attack his Porygon Z before ordering conversion. At once, the bird's yellow eyes lock on a Haunter, and as Eevee leaps at Porygon Z, the small fox phases directly through it. Shocking his voice, Silver asks what just happened, but with a smile, Oak responds that conversion is a move that lets his Pokemon copy an opponent's type. And since it's just copied Haunter's ghost typing, Eevee will be unable to touch it with any of its normal moves. On the other hand, Porygon Z still has all of its original moves, meaning he can still strike the evolution Pokemon with no trouble. To prove this point, Oak has his Pokemon use a tackle, and as he said, this connects, sending Eevee skidding across the ground while Gengar and Haunter laugh in tandem. A few seconds later, this comedic bond is broken as Agatha instructs her partner to use a Shadow Ball, and knowing how damaging this will be to Haunter, Silver cries for it to dodge. However, Haunter, it seems, is still playing by its own rules, and so instead of fleeing, it stands, or rather floats, its ground, mocking Gengar to take its best shot. Agatha and her partner are more than happy to accept this offer, with the latter firing an orb of concentrated darkness at his pre-evolution. Growing impatient, Silver once again tells his ghost type to flee, but smirking and shaking his head, Haunter remains resolute.
Finally, the Shadow Ball makes impact, though not in the way anyone had expected, as using its detached hands, Haunter is able to catch the Shadow Ball before it can touch its body. Even this small bit of contact is enough to deal super effective damage, but in Haunter's eyes, this is worth it for the gag, as it winds up like a pitcher and tosses the black orb back at Porygon Z. Still being a ghost type, this will hit hard, and so thinking fast, Oak has his database bird use conversion on Eevee to revert it back to its normal typing. However, this is exactly what Haunter wanted, and using his keen mind, Silver picks up on this, realizing that Haunter just bought him an Eevee in opening, and so endeavors not to squander it. As the Shadow Ball passes harmlessly through Porygon Z, Silver calls for a swift, and not missing a beat, Eevee leaps into the air, firing stars which strike true, causing the bird a decent amount of pain. Silver then looks to Haunter, and with a genuine gratitude in his voice, thanks the ghost type for helping him and Eevee. Shrewdly, Agatha comments that it seems like Haunter very much wants to help his trainer, and it makes sense since their strengths complement each other. The only thing holding them back is their inability to work in a team. Bluntly, Silver admits that she is right, saying that ever since he caught it back in Lavender Town, it's been too focused on messing around to battle seriously. However, here Oak cuts in, putting his years of research to good use, and he suggests that maybe the issue isn't Haunter not changing for Silver, but instead Silver not adapting to what makes Haunter unique, since, as they've just seen, its unpredictability can be a powerful asset in battle. These words remind Silver of what Ash and Misty said during their Passio battle with Koga, and so, looking over at the gas Pokemon, he asks Haunter if he would be willing to try listening to him again, if in return, he stops trying to fight in a serious manner. Haunter replies with a crackling cry of its name that Silver interprets to mean yes, and so turning back to the battle at hand, he takes command of both of his Pokemon at last. This newly forced teamwork does wonders for Silver, with Eevee and Haunter being able to pull off some unique combos thanks to Silver finally taking Haunter's battle style into consideration. Agatha and Oak, for their part, are impressed at how quickly Silver's mind can adapt, but this does not mean they are willing to give him the win and reapply the pressure. adventure. Together they are able to take down Eevee, who is still relatively inexperienced in battle, though it comes at a cost of Porygon Z leaving itself open for a counterattack that takes it out soon after. From her side of the field, Agatha sneers that her old rival's battling skills have gone to rot while he's been off researching, then, with a leering grin, looks back at Silver and Haunter, ready to turn this battle into a duel of ghosts. Silver and Haunter are equally prepared, with the middle stage Ghost using Shadow Sneak to launch a sneak attack on Gengar. However, at the last second, Agatha has her partner use Double Team, seemingly splitting it into dozens of Gengar, which throws off Haunter's attack. Not being able to tell which is the real Gengar, Silver tells Haunter that he's counting on it to figure it out for them. And taking this as permission to smoke its opponent out with a little bit of mischief, the Poison Ghost pulls a paper bag seemingly out of nowhere and inflates it by blowing into it. Confused, Agatha demands to know what this is meant to accomplish, but the answer is made self-evident a moment later when Haunter slams its free hand into the makeshift balloon, bursting it with a loud bang. Instinctively, each of the Gengar cover their ears, but one of them does it slightly before the others, and catching this with his keen eye, Silver points out the real one. Trusting Silver's judgment, Haunter launches a Shadow Punch at the Gengar, and his faith is rewarded as the blow strikes Gengar's chin, knocking it off its feet and dispelling the other duplicates.
Silver then tells Haunter to finish up with another Shadow Punch, but Agatha, despite her advanced age, has not slowed any in mind or muscle, and so commands Gengar to counter this with another Shadow Ball. Spinning in midair, Gengar lobs the Orb of Shadows just as Haunter's Spectral Fist shoots out at it. Meeting in the middle, these two attacks collide, then shortly after explode, sending dust and particles of Umbral energy everywhere as the pair of Pokemon are blasted with super effective damage. When the dust settles, both Haunter and Gengar look to be on the verge of fainting, with neither trainer daring to say a word. Then, with a weak chuckle, Haunter falls forward, collapsing to the ground with spirals in place of eyes. Stepping forward despite the loss, Silver tells his goofball friend that it did a great job, while Agatha nods that his Haunter did show plenty of promise, just as his trainer did, before giving what might be her version of a grandmotherly smile, though to Silver's eye it resembles a smirk, as she tells him that Haunter's loss wasn't due to a lack of skill or even power, but rather to a lack of bulk, since simply by virtue of being in its final form, Gengar is capable of taking more hits, hence why it managed to stay up when Haunter couldn't. Silver nods, gruffly thanking her for the somewhat obvious pointer, but Agatha snaps at him not to interrupt, since she wasn't finished. What she was going to say is that Haunter as a second stage Pokemon lacks the bulk of a Gengar, but that could easily be rectified at any point through a simple trade, and if the boy would like, she would be willing to assist him in evolving his Haunter. Where once, the shocked but grateful Silver would have made this decision unilaterally, now he looks to Haunter, asking if it would like to evolve, and when the ghost type claps his hands and cackles eagerly, the young redhead accepts the old woman's offer. And so, it is that when Silver and Looker take to the road an hour later, it is with Silver's newly evolved Gengar floating by his side and cracking jokes to get used to his new body. In fact, at Looker's suggestion, Silver begins to travel with the different Pokemon outside of its ball each day in the hopes that it will tighten their bond and show them that he sees them as partners rather than merely tools. For Feraligatr, this isn't a challenge, as despite all of Silver's past misdeeds, the Quack remains intensely loyal to his trainer, and is eager to fight alongside him again, especially after his defeat at the hands of Mewtwo. Honchko comparatively is a bit more tentative, still being a bit put off by the new larger body Silver bestowed upon it without his permission. To make up for this, Silver spends much of the next several days working with it to get comfortable flying again. When it has gotten the hang of gliding in its new body, he takes to riding on its back, and as this is Silver's first flight-worthy Pokemon, it's an exhilarating experience that brings him closer than ever before. Machamp is another comparatively difficult Pokemon to form a bond with, as it does view itself as a weapon much like Silver used to. Thankfully, Looker is able to help here, having his own partner Krogon come out to speak with it about better use for his more martial traits. And though Machamp is initially reluctant at first, it seems to find some kinship with its fellow fighting type, accepting its offer to spar as a potential way to let off steam with complete confidence it would dominate, only to lead to the brutal brute viewing the carefree frog as his teacher after a gentle attitude adjustment. At Looker's suggestion, it also occasionally acts as a ride Pokemon for Silver, in a manner similar to how the detective observed the Machamp of the Alola region doing. For his part, Silver is more than a little embarrassed at being bridle carried by his own Pokemon, but for the sake of forging a closer bond with Machamp, he allows this, and admittedly, the gentle swing of Machamp's arms as it moved does feel nice.
As for Magneton, it has always been a stalwart companion, just like Feraligatr, willing to sacrifice even its own well-being for the sake of Silver's goals. Where once he would have considered this his due as its trainer, now the redhead feels that this is the cause for an apology. And so one evening, when he and Looker have stopped to set up camp, he approaches the Magnet Pokemon and offers to remove Explosion from its moveset, so it no longer has to injure itself for him. However, to his surprise, Magneton refuses the offer, clearly wanting to keep the move so that it can still be of use to Silver. Adding the cool metal on the head, Silver tells it that it really doesn't have to do this for him, since he's done with that sort of mindset. But once more, the Steel type shakes its three heads, signifying its desire to keep the move. With a sigh, eye, Silver finally accepts that this is truly what Magneton wants, though he does at least promise that from now on he will not use the move so callously, instead saving it as a last resort. Finally, there's Eevee. Since joining the team, the Fluffball has been a bundle of unconditional love, and now at last, Silver feels he can reciprocate it. Though he's not overly effusive with his affection, Eevee can still tell the care its trainer has for it, and so nuzzles up to him at any chance it gets. He also aims to please whenever he chooses it for practice battles against Looker, and despite being the newest member of his team, there is an instant connection there that makes their battle cohesion seem effortless, like they share a mind. Seeing this closeness, Looker suggests that his protege make it his permanent walking partner, and having no objections, Silver begins to keep it out of its ball for longer and longer stretches of the journey to Saffron City. Eventually, after several weeks of walking, Silver and Looker do arrive, and thanks to Looker radioing ahead, the safe house is already furnished and prepared for their operation. It is at a modest house, chosen to be inconspicuous, though after so long on the road, it feels like a palace to the detective and his protege. After taking some time to settle in, Looker gets to work making contact with allies and assets in the area, while Silver goes through the Interpol database, reviewing what they have on Giovanni, and adding any information he may have on their father that could assist in the case. When Looker sees him doing this, he expresses surprise, having figured that the boy would have headed straight for the gym to get his final badge, but Silver replies that he will face the gym later. For now, he wants to get to work to bring down Team Rocket, as well as continue his training, since like he said to Agatha, he's done going off half-cocked. Smiling that he knew he could count on Silver, Looker beckons him over, and as the redhead takes a seat beside him, he begins his agent training in earnest.
Stepping out of the healing room, Ash and Misty make their way over to the battlefield, with Misty asking Erica if she minds them using it. The grass specialist replies that she doesn't mind one bit, especially if it means no more punching from her former student, giving her a fine smile as she takes her place as the referee and asks how many Pokemon they'll be using. In unison, Ash and Misty reply 6, and Erica encourages them to bring out their first Pokemon. Feeling it might need a win after its battle with the One-Eyed King, Ash decides to open with Crocodile, a decision which makes Meowth groan when he sees Misty's choice, Gyarados. However, Ash is undeterred, telling Crocodile to make use of the packed dirt battlefield to move fast using Dig. Plunging its mighty claws into the dirt, it takes Crocodile only a moment to vanish underground, but from her side of the field, Misty taunts that this is an obvious mistake, since in case he's forgotten, her Gyarados is immune to ground-type moves like Dig. Smile not faltering for even a second, Ash retorts that he remembers, and he also remembers what the Sea Serpent is critically vulnerable to. Pupils dilating, Misty knows what this means, but before she can call for any form of counter, Crocodile emerges directly behind Gyarados, and on Ash's command, clamps his jaw around the end of Gyarados' tail for a quad-effective Thunder Fang. The atrocious Pokemon roars in both fury and pain, but luckily Misty's mind remains calm, and so drawing on the bond they forged, she cries for it to calm down and use Aqua Tail. At once, Gyarados' eyes come back into focus, and with a more determined roar now, it manifests a jet of water out the back of its tail. Still being affixed to the Sea Serpent, Crocodile takes this point blank to the face, howling in pain as he is critically waterboarded. Though this, as it turns out, is not the worst thing to happen. In an attempt to catch his breath, Crocodile opens his mouth, but this simply frees Gyarados' tail, which with the speed and sound of a whip crack, darts back before looping around Crocodile's snout, muzzling the desert demon and taking away its super effective weapon. However, it is not Crocodile's only weapon, and so in an attempt to free itself, the ground and dark type thrusts its claws upward. But Misty is prepared for this, having Gyarados show off its tremendous strength by lifting Crocodile off its feet completely. This not only puts tremendous strain on Crocodile's jaws, the leverage point of its entire body weight, but it also puts Gyarados' tail out of arm's reach, truly immobilizing the Croc. Frantically, Ash tries to come up with a counter strategy, but it seems his time is up, as when Gyarados levels the tip of its tail between Crocodile's eyes, both trainers know this match is over. A second later, the point-blank Aqua Tail strikes again, blasting the Croc out of Gyarados' grip and into the ground where it lies unconscious.
Following his starter, Ash next chooses Charizard, causing Meowth to finally break his silence and hiss in Ash's ear that he may have a screw loose since he keeps sending out the worst possible choices to face a water type. However, Ash, in a tone troubling similar to Giovanni's assured temper, points out that Charizard isn't just a fire type, it's also a flying type, meaning that with its powerful wings, it has access to a whole area of the battlefield that Gyarados can't follow it to. To demonstrate this, Ash then calls for Charizard to fly up high before telling it to use hit and run tactics, raining thunder punches down on Gyarados from above, then retreating back into the air. Even Misty has to acknowledge that this is a pretty clever strategy, and it's only because Ash announces in advance that her Serpent is able to narrowly avoid the first punch. However, she does see one flaw in it, and when she says as much, Ash feels compelled to ask what that might might be. Smilingly sweet, Misty replies that it's all predicated on the assumption that she hasn't taught Gyarados fly. Ash ogles for a moment, wondering if it's possible, until Meowth calmly whispers in his ear that it's a bluff. It's gotta be. Finding comfort in this, Ash has Charizard retreat back into the air to avoid an Aqua Tail. Then, with his confidence tone back in place, urges Misty to prove her claim if she really has taught her sea snake to fly. Matching his confidence with a grin of her own, Misty replies that it would be her pleasure as she utters one single command: Waterfall.
Suddenly, Gyarados goes ramrod straight, pointing itself upward at Charizard, as beneath it a jet of water shoots up to carry it into the sky. Both Ash and Meowth are too shocked to even think of a counter, and it seems Charizard is in the same boat, as none of them do anything, while Gyarados crashes headlong into the Fire Lizard, eliciting a roar of pain from the super effective move. On Misty's command, Gyarados then attempts to repeat his prior trick of tying up his opponent, this time aiming for Charizard's wings in a clear attempt to ground it, but unlike last time, Ash is ready, and so calls for a Thunder Punch, which forces the water type to abort its plan in order to avoid what could have been match-ending damage. Knowing that Gyarados cannot stay in the air forever, Misty pins all her hopes on the next attack, that being Aqua Tail, while Ash does likewise a Thunder Punch. As the two titans swing, and when fist and tail connect, water and electricity reaves them both, causing Charizard and Gyarados to fall in a heap together. Urgently, Ash and Misty both cry out their heavy hitters' names, but only one rises, and that is Gyarados. Charizard for its part had taken super effective damage from the collision of both moves, and this is enough to render it unconscious. Rising back to his full height, Gyarados roars triumphantly, having beaten the little punk Charmeleon that used to pester it, even if it was a little bigger, while his partner beams that this is the fruit of their training. Though perhaps this adulation is a bit premature, as a second later, the fatigue and damage of these last two battles catches up with it, and it keels over, thus ending the duel of pseudo-dragons, and bringing her team down to 5.
Giat is unable to battle, Dragonite wins. These words ring throughout the halls of the Indigo Plateau as Gary recalls his final Pokemon. Having already known the outcome of this match from the beginning, he is not disappointed at all with his team's performance. Instead, recognizing how each member did a commendable job using their various strengths to carry out each of their roles as best they could. But even after a month of training, they are nowhere near a champion level trainer like Lance. Speaking of the Dragon Master, he saunters over to Gary, congratulating him on another good effort. Gary in turn thanks his mentor, knowing his part in this performance, where that is what it is, a performance. Though he cannot see them, Gary is certain that they must have an audience, since it is only when people are watching that Lance bothers to talk to him after a battle. And when the champion goes as far as to pull a gift box from within his cape, Gary realizes that it must be an important audience. Briefly, in a moment of silence, Gary considers refusing this gift, shaming his pseudo-sponsor and exposing him for the two-faced wretch that he is. However, this petty feeling quickly passes as it has every other time, as he reminds himself that even Lance has done very little to actually train him. Simply battling against a champion-level trainer is making him stronger, and it would be a fool to throw that away out of spite. And so, swallowing his pride, the young oak accepts the box, opening it and to his surprise finding a Pokeball inside. Smiling, Lance informs him that inside of that is a Dragonair that he bred and trained specifically to pass on to a younger trainer with great potential, and he is proud to say that he truly believes Gary is fit for that role. Though Gary thanks the Dragon Master for his generous gift, and to his credit, it is generous as a Dragonite are especially rare, he can't help to find it somewhat hollow, just like the rest of his time as Lance's student. To be given a Pokemon that has already been trained takes away the challenge of raising it, and for a moment, Gary almost has to laugh at how Ash-like that thought is. Once he wouldn't have batted an eye at the thought of the success without struggle, just as Lance does, considering it is his right as a prodigy. But it seems that somewhere along the way, he actually came to admire Ashy Boy's grit and the way he fought tooth and nail to earn what he wanted. Each victory was hard fought, often built on countless failures, but they were real. And as Gary looks at Lance now, he has far more respect for the comparatively meager, hard-won achievements of Ash than the many easily earned successes of the champion.
With this charade done, Lance departs to greet their guests, who as it turns out are a news crew from Celadon City, looking to interview him once more about his heroics on New Island. Thankfully, this time Lance chooses not to drag Gary along as a prop, though he is sure that it's because the TV crew would have already gotten plenty of shots with him and Lance together during the battle. Gary Oak, famous grandson of Professor Oak, and now protege to the regional champion and hero of New Island, the luckiest boy in Kanto. It is admittedly perfect PR, which shields Lance from any reprisal regarding Ash's death, while also tying him closer to the beloved Oak family. Truly an act of genius. Looking up, Gary sees that not all of their spectators are gone, as standing atop the platforms leading into their chambers are the Elite Four. Or at least, they are the E4 in name alone currently, as it hadn't been publicized yet that their ranks had been decreased. But despite having lived under the same roof as them for a month, Gary has had very little to do with these three trainers, as while it is clear they all respect Lance, none of them are what Gary would call his friend. In fact, as far as he can tell, the Dragon Master is loved by all, but liked by none. And in that sense, Gary truly pities him. However, there is no pity in the eyes of the Elite Four as they survey Gary, seemingly judging him from on high, before one by one turning their backs on the young man and returning to their rooms. The sole exception is the youngest and newest of them, who'd retired his grandfather's rival Agatha, a man with long dark hair who specializes in no type and uses a foreign Pokemon as his ace. The one who is set to almost rival Lance in power, Pierce the Enigma. He alone stays, and when he moves, it is not to enter his room, but rather to descend the winding stairs that lead to where Gary is. In his deep voice, Pierce drolly tells Gary that there is something truly ironic to his position. He nearly avoided being a pawn to that bastard Giovanni, only to wind up a pawn of Lance instead. A little irritated by this snide introduction, Gary asks what of it, choosing not to show his hand this early. But smirking, Pierce replies that the cause is the same in both cases. It is because the boy lacks power. Definitely irritated now, Gary asks if the Elite Four member is calling him weak, but the dark-haired man sighs that weakness is the opposite of strength, not power. And while strength is a part of power, it is not the entirety of it. For example, the gym leaders are strong. The Elite Four are strong. Gary himself, along with his friends Silver and Ritchie, are strong. But only men like Lance and Giovanni are powerful. The difference is the strong overcome and manipulate the weak, while the powerful manipulate and overcome the strong. Even now, Lance is likely motivated to train Gary not just for pretty pictures, but so he may also fill Agatha's vacant spot and remain in power longer. Admittedly, Gary's friend Ash had the makings of power as well, but sadly, that was not meant to be. The casual dismissal of Ash turns his irritation into true anger far more than any of Lance's actions, and so coldly, Gary asks exactly what sets them apart.
As if he had been waiting for Gary to ask, Pierce replies that power is 1 part strength, 1 part charisma, and 1 part creativity. From what he has seen, Gary is both strong and charismatic, but as his last battle with Lance attests, he is not yet creative, since a creative mind is one who utilizes any resource he has before him. He does very much hope that that would change, however, since he sees the potential of power in Gary, and would like to see it achieved. However, since he's glacially cold now, Gary asks why, and in his measured voice, Pierce responds that he sees something of himself in the Oak Boy, having spent much of his own life at the whim of powerful men. But their time is rapidly coming to an end, and as the next generation of powerful people make their place in sculpting the future, he would like to see Gary do so alongside him, since he believes they could achieve great things together. Holding back a smirk, Gary thinks to himself, that ego must be the secret 4th tenet to Pierce's perception of power. But as the Enigma returns to his chamber at last, having seemingly said his piece, Gary has to admit that at least 2 of the things the Elite Four members said to him were true. First, that Ash did indeed possess a mix of strength, charisma, and creativity, which served him well. And the second is, until he, Gary, can show the same creativity his old rival did, he will not be able to defeat Lance and attain the dream that he and Ash shared.
In the time since Gyarados and Charizard's climactic duels, several small skirmishes have taken place, with Ash losing his Bellossom and Hitmonlee, while Misty has lost both her Lombre and Squirtle, and has taken a great deal of damage on her newest combatant, who has proven to be a strong cornerstone of Misty's team, leaving her with a 1 Pokemon lead. It is her newly evolved Poliwrath. Wanting to see how his method of raising is stacked up to Misty's, Ash chooses Psyduck as his second to last Pokemon. At first, Psyduck's expression is his usual look of befuddlement, causing Misty to reflexively groan. But as he makes eye contact with his opponent and former trainer, the somewhat dopey Duck's slack face gains an expression of focus and determination, causing Misty to have to admit that it looks like Ash has really brought about a massive change in Psyduck. But the boy just grins that she hasn't seen anything yet, as he calls for a confusion. At once, the Duck's eyes flash blue, and much to Misty and Poliwrath's surprise, the tadpole Pokemon is lifted into the air and slammed against a wall. Thankfully, Poliwrath is able to get back up easily, but is clearly rattled, with Misty asking how Psyduck was able to grow this much in only a few months. Still grinning, Ash replies that it was thanks to one of the friends they made along the way, not daring to say Mewtwo's name in the presence of either Erica or Giselle. Nonetheless, Misty surmises his meaning, saying that perhaps sometime he could help give her Starmie a boost, as she recalls Poliwrath in favor of the eponymous starfish. Despite Starmie's lack of a face, what follows can only be referred to as a stare down between the 2 aquatic espers, with both waiting for their trainers to give them a command.
As one, Ash and Misty cry out their next attacks, Confusion for Psyduck and Psybeam for Starmie, and with the speed of thought, both Pokemon launch their psychic moves. Being more experienced in the art of psionic warfare, Starmie's attack proves superior in the opening salvo, with the beam of psychic energy piercing through Psyduck's confusion and striking the Duck in the face, causing him to fall backwards with a heavy thud. Wordly, Ash cries out asking asking if the foul was okay. But with an affirmative quack, Psyduck shoots him a thumbs up, staggering back to his feet. However, Misty does not stay still during this time, ordering a rapid spin in hopes that this time, when Psyduck goes down, he'll stay down. The cry of "head up!" the mysterious Pokemon takes to the air, spinning in separate directions to propel itself forward as it slams into Psyduck's face, causing the yellow duck to quack in annoyance and try to swat his opponent away with a scratch. This does next to nothing against Starmie's thick skin, and as it goes flying past Psyduck, it performs an aerial turn, aiming to strike the back of Psyduck's head via his blind spot and knock him out. Seeing this, Ash cries for Psyduck to watch out, but before the words are even out of his mouth, Starmie is already frozen in place by Psyduck's confusion, with the avian having used its psychic abilities to see all around him and target Starmie just when it entered his blind spot and drop its guard. Meowth translates this explanation in a whisper to Ash, and when he hears this, Ash's eyes light up as he praises the bird for all of the hard work he's put in honing its psychic abilities. However, this is not the extent of Psyduck's powers, as the fiendish fowl raises its hand, spinning it rapidly and telekinetically doing likewise to Starmie. When he is sure Starmie is in no position to launch a counterattack, he lets go, and with a crunch, Starmie hits the wall, then collapses, its gem flashing to indicate its inability to battle. This evens out the match, with both trainers having 2 Pokemon left. And knowing Psyduck resists everything her last Pokemon has in its arsenal, Misty has no choice but to return Poliwrath to the field. Eagerly, the tadpole Pokemon readies itself to fight, while Psyduck looks just intent on ending things and getting his trainer to the lead he has been chasing since the battle began. On Erika's call to begin, Ash calls for another confusion, but this time, Misty has a plan, having observed how Ash and Psyduck use the move, and so calls for a submission. At once, Poliwrath grabs a hold of its ankles and begins to roll, using the momentum to dampen some of the impact when it collides with the wall, and even managed to bounce off when Psyduck releases its psychic hold. Using this, Misty has Poliwrath redirect itself directly into Psyduck, much to the yellow mallard's distress, as it forces all of the raw muscle amplified by speed that he caused to create a painful impact that sends Psyduck tottering backwards. Sensing weakness, Poliwrath advances, planting a foot on one of Psyduck's webbed ones to hold it in place, then delivering a series of 1-2 punches to his face. As a pair of black eyes begin to loom on Psyduck's face, Poliwrath steps back, and Ash calls for confusion to wrap things up. However, poor Psyduck is too punch-drunk to muster any psychic energy, and so Ash is forced to resort to a scratch attack instead.
This is as useless as ever, with the small scratch he creates on Poliwrath's arm being nothing compared to the fist of the beak he receives in return. And briefly, Ash considers swapping Psyduck out. But for better or worse, our young hero isn't given a chance, as Poliwrath, wanting to end things before Psyduck finds his bearings, launches a brutal punch at the top of the duck's head, which sends him crashing face first into the dirt. The resulting impact is painful to watch, though not nearly as painful as it is for Psyduck, whose head throbs with both the pain of being punched and then hitting his forehead on packed earth. And as it has in the past, this pain directly translates into power, with Psyduck's psychic abilities flaring to life once again. However, unlike before, this is not the honed psychic power he had trained with Mewtwo to muster, but instead the raw, untamed potential that has always dwelt inside him, which now springs forth like a geyser. All around Psyduck, patches of the field are lifted into the air, swirling around him as his headache goes out of control. Unluckily for Poliwrath, he happens to be standing on one of these, and so is lifted up into the maelstrom. Urgently, Misty tells it to get down, since one more good hit should take out Psyduck, but each time it tries to leap down, a new piece of debris hits it and sends it right back into the raging storm of psionic power. Ash, meanwhile, is just as worried as Misty, having never seen Psyduck like this before, and so cries for it to calm down before it tears the entire gym apart. Warningly, Erika informs Ash that unless he can get his Psyduck under control, she'll have to step in to neutralize it. Seeing that he's out of time and not wanting his friend to suffer super effective damage for it, Ash tells Meowth to ready one of his sneak chops. But before he can, Psyduck's headache reaches its zenith, and with the force of explosion, he dispels the maelstrom, sending all his assembled debris flying. As Poliwrath is still among that, he is sent flying as well, hitting the back wall and being buried under several chunks of battlefield. In a moment of vain hope, Misty urges her friend to get back up, but after 30 full seconds of no response, Erika calls the match for Psyduck, bringing Misty down to 1. That one, as it turns out, is her former shoulder, now a massive cloister, with Misty looking even more confident as the clam eyes his opponent with a cocky smirk. As to her and Cloister's great fortune, Psyduck is definitely looking worse for wear after expending all that psychic energy, and so Misty decides to go for broke, commanding an ice beam while Psyduck can't use confusion to stop it. This hits, instantly turning the yellow duck into an ice block, and as Ash cries out to Psyduck one last time, Misty has Cloister follow up with a hydro pump, which shatters the ice and takes out the heavily exhausted Psyduck at last. Smugly, the Cerulean Prodigy wipes her brow of sweat, and praises Ash's training methods, whatever they may have been, as he'd made good on his vow to turn the duck into a monster, while Ash grins back that he couldn't be any more proud of how strong Poliwrath has become. But now, Ash is down to his last Pokemon. And though Meowth looks up at his trainer expectantly, the black-haired youth shakes his head, admitting that he's known from the start who he wants to use as his final Pokemon against Misty. He then brings out Kingdra, with the aquatic dragon using the fin on its back like a wing to float at the center of the field. Misty is awed by the majesty of this Pokemon, commenting with a small note of envy that Ash didn't have it the last time they met, and Ash nods that he caught it after it helped him stop a bunch of poachers from stealing a herd of water-type Pokemon. Smiling, Misty replies that even if it is a defender of water types, she and Cloyster are still going to take it down. A claim which makes Ash grin as well, saying that likewise, just because Kingdra is a protector doesn't mean it will hold back against Cloyster. The two trainers then nod, and the final battle begins.
Being unaccustomed to land battles, Kingdra is a bit slower than it would be on the water, but even still, Cloyster is slower, allowing the Dragon of the Sea to get off the first hit with the Twister. All around, its mighty gale blows, and as this forms into a miniaturized tornado, striking Cloyster and sending it skidding back. This gives Misty an idea, and so she tells Cloyster to use an Ice Beam on the ground, create an ice slide, which the massive clam can use to control and accelerate its movement. And just like that, the dynamic of the battle shifts, with Misty and Cloyster gaining the speed and mobility advantage they needed to put themselves back in control, as Cloyster begins zipping around the field on its ice slide. This not only makes it harder to hit with the movement impaired Kingdra, but also makes the dragon into a target, as while its water typing stops the Ice Beam from being super effective, no type combination can stop the pain of Cloyster redirecting itself towards Kingdra and crashing directly into it. This quickly becomes a pattern, with Cloyster using itself as a battering ram to clobber the Sea Knight from all angles. And though Ash tries to come up with ways to avoid this, Kingdra simply is far too out of its element to avoid these attacks. As Giovanni had warned him, anger soon begins to cloud his mind, with each countermeasure growing more and more erratic. And as these fail as well, it seems inevitable that Misty will be able to claim her revenge for the SSN. However, this thought is just what Ash needs, as the memories of spending time with his friends on the ship, of the fun they all had together, not just there, but throughout their journey, washes over him, clearing away the anger and replacing it with a warming wave of affection. Blinking as if something tangible had been obscuring his sight, Ash suddenly sees clear, and as he looks to Kingdra, fighting its hardest despite the terrible position, he knows what he has to do: save it and win this match. With the cry, Ash has Kingdra stop trying to flee, and this confuses everyone, most of all Kingdra itself, who snorts in bewilderment, but obeys nonetheless. Misty, for her part, wonders if this is Ash just giving up, and so tells Cloyster to use Ice Tackle on Kingdra once more, but this is exactly what Ash had wanted her to do. As Cloyster lines up for the hit, Ash tells Kingdra to use Hyper Beam. Slowly, an orb of orange energy begins to manifest in front of Kingdra's snout, though at this pace, it is doubtful that it will finish charging, let alone fire before Cloyster hits. Misty says as much, a confident grin on her face, but Ash is undeterred, saying that whether he wins or loses here will be because he put his faith in his friend, and that's a gamble that he's always willing to take. Those simple words, they hit each spectator differently, with Misty feeling hope, Meowth feeling pride, Erica feeling relief, and Giselle feeling concern. However, none are effective quite as much as Kingdra, who draws faith from its trainer's belief, rebounding its efforts and firing the Hyper Beam. By now, Cloyster is too close to dodge, and as Misty cries out the big bivalve Pokemon's name, it is caught up in the blast and sent hurtling into the ceiling. No one says a word as Cloyster hits the ground a moment later, all wondering if the hefty water type is going to make some sort of miraculous comeback. However, nothing of the sort occurs. As Misty runs up to her Pokemon, she finds that it has been knocked out, giving the victory to Ash. Returning Cloyster to its ball and carefully making her way over the mess of slowly melting ice from her near successful strategy, paying Erica a nervously chuckling nod to ask for forgiveness for the temporary winter wonderland that she had made in her mentor's grass gym. Misty, as she steps closer to her friend, thanks him for the great battle, smiling, albeit sadly, that it looks like he managed to pull ahead of her yet again. Turning to smile though, Ash replies that it's plain to see she and her Pokemon have come a long way too, and that he can't wait to battle her again. Clasping hands, Misty replies that next time they do it, it'll be in the Pokemon League Finals, and she's gonna win, while Ash replies that he's looking forward to it. Though first, they have to gather their friends and deal with Giovanni. Giselle suddenly cuts in from the stands, however, getting the duo's attention, along with Meowth to hold up Ash's egg, glowing in the incubator, indicating it's ready to hatch at any moment. The cat and his master both sharing a worried look, and yet another worry to balance among their Herculean efforts.
Well, that was certainly a wild part, huh? So how do you feel knowing a bit more about what happened in Ash's absence? What do you think about Ash's plan for revenge against Giovanni? What was up with Professor Oak and Mew saving Ash back at New Island? And why hasn't he told anybody he's alive? And what do you think is about to come out of that egg? Let us know all this and more of your thoughts in the comments below. Special thanks to my buddy Pickled Dill for helping to bring my and Ronin's ideas for this part into fruition, as well as all the artists and composers who contribute to the video's makeup. And last but never least, our patrons, of which, if you would like to support the channel in the most effective way possible, then you should consider joining their ranks. Crimson Manifesto, DJ the Lazy Gamer, Dominique, Knuckles OX, Pizza 15X, Aaron Winters, Narku, Normandy 1998, Jay Ray, Stephen Norton, Shao P, Anthony Canales, Daniel Smith, Inebriated, Infernate B 326, Jamal Hayden, Kevin, Adrian Carr, Samuel Viveros, Vigigito Gaming 78, and Zach Haji. As always, thank you guys so much for all you do for the channel. It means the absolute world to me. But that's all I've got for you guys in this one. So be sure to take care of yourselves and the world around you. And as always, go beyond plus ultra. And I'll see you guys next time.